we were discussing, we were about to start with gender. Gender is a form of stratification. After this topic, I'll deal with the social mobility and one or two conceptual issues with respect to certification as well, which is also important. First of all, we need to understand what do we mean by gender and how is it different from sex? A very basic question. Okay. Generally, we say that sex is biological and gender is social, socially constructed. Okay. But then still the answer is not yet clear. What is gender? We have only explained that gender is social construction, sex is biologically given to us. But then what is gender? Gender is basically nothing expected behavior. Gender means expected behavior. ठीक है? And gender includes everything. भाई male and female. This is sex or gender? ये सेक्स है भाई. Male and female are sex. Then gender क्या होता है? Masculinity and femininity. ये जेंडर होता है. वो क्योंकि एक्सपेक्टेड बिहेवियर है. Femininity. Expected behavior. Okay. So being a man is sex. You should be like this. यानी ये सेक्स होने की वजह से तुम्हारा जेंडर ये होना चाहिए. Being a man, you should be doing this. You should not be doing this. जेंडर बताया जा रहा है. एक्सपेक्टेड बिहेवियर क्या है? That is what gender is. Masculine, feminine, female. Female is sex. Being a female, you should not be doing this. भाई लड़की हो के तुम ये कर रहे हो. मतलब वो क्या है? एक्सपेक्टेड बिहेवियर को ब्रीच कर रहे हो. एक्सपेक्टेड बिहेवियर में रहो, यानी अपने जेंडर में रहो. सेक्स, अपने जेंडर में रहो. सोसाइटी हमें रोज ये बोलती है कि सेक्सेस प्लीज बी इन योर जेंडर्स. अपनी हद में रहो. हद का मतलब होता है जेंडर. ठीक है? एक्सपेक्टेड बिहेवियर. एक्सपेक्टेड बिहेवियर. Who expects this behavior? सोसाइटी. क्योंकि आप किसी एक ग्रुप को पॉइंट आउट नहीं कर पाओगे. ये नॉर्म्स हैं. These are norms. ठीक है? सोशल फैक्ट्स हैं ये. एक्सटर्नल टू एनी इंडिविजुअल और ग्रुप एंड कोवर्सिव. उसको ब्रीच करोगे तो फिर लोग ताने मारेंगे. तुम्हारे हाथ में नहीं होएगा को कंट्रोल करना. ठीक है? This is what sex and gender is. Now, Different studies have been conducted world over, globally. Who is intelligent, male और फीमेल? इसके ऊपर स्टडीज हुई हैं. The question is, how do you measure intelligence? उसके बाद तो आप बताओगे कि कौन इंटेलिजेंट ज्यादा है. ओके, सवाल उस पे होता है पहले. हाउ डू यू मेजर इंटेलिजेंस? किसी ने कहा है कि यू कैन नॉट measure the ability of fish by seeing whether it can climb the tree or not. मछली का काम तो तैरना ही है. आप अगर ये देखो कि वो पेड़ पे चढ़ नहीं पा रही तो इसलिए वो बेकार है, तो फिर आप तो तरीका ही आपका गलत है. ठीक है. तो हाउ डू यू मेजर इंटेलिजेंस? यू नो, it is argued and it has been conducted scientifically across the world by different studies that men are universally let me check the figure data. And this is one of the study. I mean, you may quote it or you may not, but that would not be so much relevant. By the time we are done with this topic, you would realize कि ये data इतना काम का है नहीं, but still we should know few fact also. Just a second. Okay. So men are universally 10% taller. Okay. On average, ये सब on average है. ठीक है. 10% taller, 20% heavier, and 30% stronger on average. On average. Okay. ठीक है. 10% taller, 20% heavier, 30% stronger. Stronger means especially in their upper bodies. Upper bodies. Chest. Okay. Universally it has been found. But it has also been found universally that women has longevity more than men. That means life expectancy of women is more than men. But women's life expectancy is more than men. There is also one more study. Another study which tells us that in the adolescence का मतलब होता है बचपन. बेसिकली आप ये समझ के चलो 14 साल की उम्र तक till 14. During adolescence, male child has capability to grasp mathematics better than female. Mathematics. Okay. ये भी एक स्टडी है कि मेल चाइल्ड हैज बेटर मैथमेटिकल माइंड देन female. But on the other hand, the same study also tells us that women has better verbal skills than men during adolescence only. तो मेन के पास अगर कुछ अच्छा है साइंटिफिकली जो कि बोला गया है, ओके, तो वुमेन किसी और फील्ड में अच्छी है. And if both are superior in their different respective domains, how can there be hierarchy? मैन मैथ्स में अच्छे हैं बट वुमेन जो है वो स्पोकन लैंग्वेज में अच्छी है, वर्बल रीजनिंग में अच्छी है और जिंदा ज्यादा देर रहेगी. लॉन्जेविटी, वुमेन ज्यादा देर तक जिंदा रहेगी. मैन क्या कर लेंगे? मैथ सॉल्व करके मर जाएंगे जल्दी. ठीक है. तो हाउ कैन यू से हु इज सुपीरियर और हु इज इनफीरियर? But the fact is, when we start attributing superiority and inferiority simply on the basis of these natural differences, then comes the problem. Then comes these are natural differences. अभी तक मैंने क्या बताया? Natural inequality और social inequality. These are natural inequality. 10% taller, 20% heavier, Rousseau. ठीक है. 30% stronger, natural inequality. Women's life expectancy is more than men, natural inequality. इसमें social तो कुछ भी नहीं बोला मैंने अभी. Male child has better mathematical mind than female. ये भी natural है. ठीक है. Woman has better verbal skills than men, natural. हालांकि let us not go into the subjectivities involved in these research. Who was the researcher? Who conducted this research? Whether he was male or female, was it value neutral research or not? उस पे नहीं जाते क्योंकि वो सब चीजें भी शेप करती है रिसर्च को. ओके. बट despite all those subjectivities, if we believe these are natural differences, then these are only natural. But once we start attributing superiority to male over female because we are measuring intelligence by mathematical skills. If you measure intelligence by mathematical skills, and if women do not come at par with men, and then you would obviously call man as intelligent. But then the scale through which you measured intelligence was the one which was naturally inclined towards male. But when you ask both of them to compete on a scale that is verbal skills, then men would be defeated. So, what is the measure of intelligence? There is no universal measure. And therefore, to say men are superior than female, superior to female, is highly absurd. And nothing less than socially constructed idea. That means there is nothing natural in the superiority of men over women. ये सब हम बनाते हैं बैठकर. तो ये तो मैंने प्रूफ कर दिया. ठीक है कि there is no superiority or inferiority naturally, only socially is there. Unfortunately, what happens is that these natural differences start playing a larger role in shaping social inequality. In America, women were denied right to vote for a very long time, till 1850s. Women did not have right to vote. African American men had right to vote before women. That means women were considered as inferior even to black men. Okay. And they were not given right to vote because it was believed they are not so intelligent enough to understand these political intricacies. This is the domain of men. So, when these natural differences played a role in creating social inequalities, it also determined to a very large extent the domain that would be men's and that would be that of women. कौन से चीज में मेन रहेंगे, कौन से में वुमेन रहेंगे, ये सब में नेचुरल डिफरेंसेस को जो हम परसीव करते हैं सोशली, उसने बहुत बड़ा रोल प्ले किया है. ओके. And women were not even allowed to play sports in America. Sports, politics, both were seen as the domain of men for a very long time. Women were not allowed to play sports. And then finally, there was an amendment in the Constitution of America that introduced Title 9, which allowed women to play sports and to be a part of sports team of different colleges, and then finally of a different representing national level. Okay. Anyhow, so the question is, how do we define gender stratification? We can simply say gender as stratification therefore refers to unequal distribution of wealth, income, prestige, and power. Simple. ठीक है. Gender stratification refers to unequal distribution of wealth, income, prestige, and power. Unequal distribution. Why unequal? Because of social inequalities. Social inequalities. Naturally, they are different, but natural differences or natural inequality assume social inequality as well. Okay. Now, the question is, are men and women biologically created or socially created? Okay, men and women. Although they are biological figures, biological bodies only, but they are created by society only through socialization. Okay, created in the sense the way they speak, the way they eat, the kind of clothes they put on, the kind of choices they make in their everyday life is designed by socialization. Okay, so family is a factory that creates gender. Okay, family is a factory that creates gender. There is one scholar, Simone de Beauvoir. He said, women is not born, is made. वुमेन पैदा नहीं होती, वो बनाई जाती. ठीक है. वुमेन इज नॉट बॉर्न, ही इज मेड वन. और ये बात तो मैन पे भी एप्लीकेबल है. मैन आर ऑल्सो नॉट बॉर्न, दे आर ऑल्सो मेड वन. बात सिर्फ वुमेन की नहीं है, दोनों की बात है. मेड वन, दे आर मेड. They are made. Men are made by giving them more wealth, by giving them more income, by giving them more prestige and power over women. Okay? How, कैसे होता है ये मैं बताता हूँ अब. There is one scholar, Margaret Mead. Margaret Mead. Her objective was to understand whether male and female differences are natural or socially constructed. This was her objective, her research question. Okay. And she believed if the differences between male and female are natural, that one is naturally intelligent, one is naturally superior, masculine, and one is, naturally made for emotional work, caring work. Okay, generally we believe that women are naturally emotional. Okay. So if these differences are really natural, then in the world, in every corner and nook, wherever men and women are there, these things would be found even amongst them. In the sense, if women is naturally emotional in India, and if women is naturally emotional, then she would be emotional even in America, even in London, even in Africa, अगर वो natural ही है, even in Antarctica, अगर वहाँ कोई होता है लड़की नाम की चीज, ठीक है, even in Arctic, Denmark. So if women is naturally natural, natural, okay, then these natural differences should be found everywhere. And this is one study that she conducted, and she as an anthropologist mainly, obviously as an individual could not visit every nook and corner of the world. एक आदमी की limitation होती है. And therefore she conducted research in a very specific pocket, and that was New Guinea. He observed 3 societies in New Guinea. New Guinea. Let me write down the name of those 3 societies. First was Arapesh. Arapesh. The name of tribe. Okay. Society. Arapesh society. Second was Mundu Gumor. Mundu Gumor. And third was Chamboli. Chamboli. Buli. Arapesh, Arapesh, Mundu Gumor, and Chamboli, Buli. Okay. Now see what she found. She found that in Arapesh, both the sexes, men and women, were involved in child rearing practices, emotional work, cooking. दोनों कर रहे हैं, आदमी भी कर रहे हैं, लेडी भी कर रही है, दोनों कुकिंग कर रहे हैं, कोऑपरेटिव भी हैं, बच्चे का ख्याल दोनों रख रहे हैं. ऐसा नहीं है कि काम पे सिर्फ एक जा रहा है दूसरा नहीं. Both are doing the emotional work. Both. Okay. Both are doing hunting as well. But largely, both are involved in something that we in our society call as feminine. In the sense, both are doing child rearing practice, looking after elderly, cooking the food, domestic work जिसे हम कहते हैं, जो दोनों कर रहे हैं. And both therefore were seen as feminine. Both sexes feminine. Both sexes were feminine because both are involved in the work that we call as feminine. Okay. Next is Mundugumur. Okay. Now in Mundugumur, both the sexes were involved in hunting and cannibalism. Both of them are involved in hunting and cannibalism. And both are aggressive, whether male or female. Cannibalism मतलब पता ही है तुम्हें, आदमी को मार के खा जाना, ठीक है? Both were hunters, okay? And both were aggressive, both were dominant. And both were engaged in wars as well. In war, you would see women warrior as well. So, in Mundugumur, both were what we call as masculine. This is Margaret Mead, who has found both sexes in Arapesh feminine and in Mundugumur both sexes were masculine. And in Chambuli, she found role reversal. Men were doing something that is done by women, and women were doing something that is done by usually what we think of as being done by men. तो इसका मतलब क्या हुआ कि जैसे हमारे घर पे क्या होता है, विमेन हाउसवाइफ है, वो घर का काम देख रही है, आदमी बाहर जा रहा है, जनरली एक मॉडल जो होता है. इन चंबोली व्हाट वाज फाउंड, men are looking after domestic work and women are going out. ऐसा कुछ you would find something of that sort also among Garo and Khasi in India, Meghalaya. Okay. हाँ, नॉर्थ ईस्ट रीजन, यस, गारो खासी में भी है, ठीक है. चंबोली, रोल रिवर्सल. Who found role reversed? Margaret Mead found. They would not say, if you ask them, आपके रोल रिवर्स कैसे, वो बोलेंगे क्या बोल रहे हो, उनको नहीं समझ आएगा. ये हम देख रहे हैं क्योंकि हमारे पास एक नॉलेज है कि मेन जो होते हैं दे go out to seek work, women on the other hand take care of the household. So it is Margaret Mead looking at the Chambuli people through Western ideological framework. Okay, the Western ideological framework fits women in this household activity and men in the public sphere. And when she found that she is not able to, she could see, yes, housework is there and outside work is, but she could not find the same two sexes doing the same role. And this also made her conclude that gender is socially constructed. There is nothing like gender. What you expect of female and male is not universally found and it is not natural difference. It is socially constructed differences. Socially constructed difference. Okay. In Israel, women join defense forces and it is compulsory for them. for every member of the household. Okay, at least one or two member, whether it is male or female does not matter. You would see women amongst Israeli troops. इसलिए इजराइल इतना पावरफुल कंट्री है, छोटा सा होने के बावजूद भी सब जगह की डोमिनेंस है. So what we established was nothing that what we established was that gender is social construction. Is a social construction. Okay, ये हमने establish किया. Okay, establish हमने किया ये. And we know if gender is socially constructed and there is nothing natural about it, then why? One or two or six women are there in parliament, rest all are men only. सवाल ये उठेगा. Why we have only very little number of women in higher education, rest all are men? Why we do not have women's labor force participation at par with men? If these are only socially constructed. Okay, because the problem is with the position, the power position. Who holds the power position? The history of world, if you look into, the rulers have been male. Okay, male rulers, male emperors, one emperor succeeding another emperor. And all throughout history, the idea of conquest and invasion was seen as a strategy to become wealthy. And unfortunately, naturally, if you look at the idea or the capability of invading or conquering someone, naturally, obviously, men are superior. And by this natural virtue of being a conquest, if they are able to hoard resources, wealth, and they become then wealthy and then gradually powerful, this ultimately translates into long-term gender differential in terms of income, power, prestige, and wealth, even in stratification of society. Now, first I'll talk about gender and work. Gender and work. Okay, to show you one strata. Okay. Why am I talking about work here? Because I have written gender stratification is unequal distribution of wealth and income, and wealth income you earn through work only ना. तो पहले तो वो दिखाना पड़ेगा. Even prestige you earn through work. Okay, तो वर्क तो इंपॉर्टेंट है क्योंकि यहीं पे छुपा है सब कुछ. तो वर्क में होता क्या है ऐसा कि अनइक्वल डिस्ट्रीब्यूशन हो जाता है. What happens in the work itself that leads to unequal distribution of income, power, and wealth? See, there are sex segregation. There is sex segregation of sexual, I would say, sexual segregation of the labor market. Sexual segregation of the labor market. Okay, sexual segregation of the labor market. How are they segregated? They are segregated in both manner, vertically and horizontally as well. So there are two types of segregation. Horizontal segregation and vertical segregation. Horizontal segregation and vertical segregation. Now the question is, what is horizontal segregation? You would see in our society there are some work which are seen as women's work. मैं पिंक जानबूझ के बना रहा हूं क्योंकि हम यही करते हैं. Pink for girls. There are some work which are seen as women's work, and then there are some work which are seen as, दिखेगा नहीं, men's work. Okay, this is nothing but horizontal segregation. कुछ है वुमेन ओनली वर्क, जहां जो आपको लगता है वुमेन का काम है ये, एंड कुछ है मेन ओनली वर्क. दिस इज नोन एज हॉरिजॉन्टल सेग्रीगेशन. फॉर एग्जांपल, सी आर्मी. आर्मी, ओके. स्कूल टीचर, रिसेप्शनिस्ट, केयर वर्क, लाइक इन द सेंस जिसे हम बोलते हैं क्रच सर्विस. क्रच सर्विस अगेन गिवन बाय वुमेन. क्रच, ओके. एंड देन देयर आर सम जॉब्स लाइक यूनिवर्सिटी प्रोफेसर. पता नहीं, सुन के ही ऐसा लगता है आदमी की बात कर रहे हो. प्रोफेसर इज जेंडर न्यूट्रल वर्ड. प्रोफेसर इज जेंडर न्यूट्रल वर्ड, लेकिन फिर भी लगता है. स्कूल टीचर भी एक जेंडर न्यूट्रल वर्ड है, लेकिन दिमाग में ईमेल ही आ रही है, क्योंकि देखा वही है, रिप्रोड्यूस वही होएगा. ओके, so there are some work in our societies which are doctor, male. Nurse, male. Okay. Air hostess, pilot. ठीक है. So this is nothing but horizontal segregation. Women only, men only. One or two exception may be there. In men only you would find women as well. I'm not saying कि होती ही नहीं है women, nor I'm saying कि you would not find school teacher, male school teacher in school. But even if you find male school teacher in school na, they would be either teaching you some subjects that we consider as domain of men, like maths, physics. इनके टीचर होंगे मेल, या फिर पीटी के टीचर होंगे, पीटी स्पोर्ट्स टीचर. ठीक है. और तुम्हें लड़कियां नहीं दिखेंगी पीटी टीचर, या फिर मैथ्स फिजिक्स में रेयरली कभी दिख जाएंगी. केमिस्ट्री की टीचर ज्यादातर मैंने देखा है फीमेल होती हैं, केमिस्ट्री की, एंड बायोलॉजी आल्सो. एंड बायोलॉजी एंड केमिस्ट्री आर लाइक ब्रदर सिस्टर्स. ज्यादातर सिस्टर्स हैं, ये सिस्टर डिसिप्लिन है, क्योंकि केमिस्ट्री इज नथिंग बट अप्लाइड बायोलॉजी. ठीक है, चलो. दिस इज हॉरिजॉन्टल सेग्रीगेशन. नाउ देन कम्स वर्टिकल सेग्रीगेशन. वर्टिकल सेग्रीगेशन इज लाइक दिस. in vertical segregation, what you would find? Vertical segregation operates within a job. Okay, it operates within a job or within a position or within an organization. Horizontal is across the organizations. Across the, और ये होता है एक ही जॉब में. अभी तुम देखो क्या होता है in every organization, whether it is Gangaram Hospital, whether it is university, Delhi University, or whether it is Level Up IAS, you would find in all these institutions the lower positions are mainly filled by women. Lower positions. Okay, बताता हूं मैं. And higher ones are occupied by male. This is vertical segregation within an organization. School teacher जैसे मैं बात करूं, you would see in school teachers are female, principal is male. Maximum case में. I'm not saying कि भाई female principal नहीं होती, होती है. मैं तो larger जो केस है उसकी बात कर रहा हूं. Okay. Similarly, in organization, you would find the white collar workers or the clerks, clerical work, that is largely being done by women. But the senior positions, managerial positions, executive positions are occupied by men. ये होता है. ठीक है. हॉस्पिटल को अगर आप देखोगे, most of the lower positions, clerical work, nurses, hospitality, receptionist, you would find women. The more you move up towards a specialist doctor, lung ka specialist, heart, you would come across males. The more you move up the ladder of specialization now, the more you see segregated market occupied by men. The more you move up the ladder of specialization, you see more and more men. The question is, when you see women in certain jobs and men in some other jobs, what happens is that the jobs which are seen as women's job are the jobs which are not given prestige or esteem or status or power or money or wealth. When you start looking at jobs as women's job, you would find all the women's job which are seen as women's job by us, जो हम stereotype बनाते हैं, you would find that these women's job are underpaid or not so powerful position. Okay, and not given so much of status. Okay, not privileged. Or underprivileged. Okay. Similarly, the jobs which are seen as masculine job, male only job, usme you would see so many rewards, allowances, तनख्वाह इतनी अच्छी, स्टेटस आपको बड़ा मिलता है, ठीक है, आपको गाड़ियां मिलेंगी अलग, वेदर यू आर इन आर्मी, ओके, or whether you are in any sector that is seen as men only, you would see the kind of perks and allowances that are given is much more that are given to women only job, or given in women only job to women, and these jobs would provide higher income, wealth, power and prestige. थर्ड जेंडर की बात करेंगे, बाद में करेंगे, लास्ट में, ठीक है, उसकी बात कर सकते हैं, यहां पे भी डाल सकते हो, ओके, देयर इज थर्ड जेंडर ऑल्सो, का कलर येलो बनाते हैं क्योंकि येलो जो है वो बहुत सही लगता है पिंक और ब्लू के साथ ना, ठीक है, ये थर्ड जेंडर है, and you would see third gender also is involved in very specific kind of jobs that are not done by either men or women. क्या होएगा वो, ऐसा होएगा prostitution, something like, या फिर sex work, begging, okay, these are the jobs which are usually seen as the jobs of transgenders, okay, और किसी की शादी पे चले जाएंगे, वो शगुन वगुन कुछ करेंगे, ऐसा ऐसा होता है जो भी, यू वुड नॉट सी वुमेन और मैन डूइंग दिस, ये इसको देखा जाता है, ये तो ये हिजड़ों की जॉब है या फिर ये उनकी जॉब है, थर्ड जेंडर की, ऐसे हम बात करते हैं, ओके, सेक्स वर्क हो गया, प्रोस्टिट्यूशन हो गया, समथिंग लाइक दिस, ओके, एंड दैट आर इन फैक्ट इन द स्केल ऑफ स्टेटस, पावर एंड प्रेस्टीज सबसे नीचे है वो, ओके, सेक्स वर्क को सबसे नीचे देखा जाएगा, प्रोस्टिट्यूशन को सबसे नीचे देखा जाएगा, बेगिंग को सबसे नीचे देखा जाएगा, ठीक है, पैसे भी नहीं होंगे ऑब्वियसली उसमें इतने ना, पावर कुछ होगी, ओके, यू विल बी लाइक एन ऑब्जेक्ट इन सेक्स वर्क, traded like commodity, okay, from one agent to another agent. Now this was sexual segregation of the labor market, and this defines the differential wealth, income and power, prestige, okay. Now the bigger question is why women join those positions which are seen as women's work. What is so special about women's work that you would find women doing them repetitively? Is it her choice? Is it her choice? Can we really say that she chose this job? No, we cannot say that. Man chooses his job, women do not. ये सबसे अनफॉर्चुनेट बात है. Women never gets choice to choose her job. Man does have choice. Why women do not have choice? ये मैं कैसे बोल रहा हूं, मैं बताता हूं. देखो, you know what is very peculiar thing about these jobs, women's only job, and these positions, the lower positions, there is one thing which is common in both of them. Both the jobs provide flexibility to women. Both the jobs provide flexibility to women. फ्लेक्सिबल है वो. देखो, स्कूल टीचर को क्या होता है, स्कूल टीचर डज नॉट हैव टू टेक क्लासेस ऑल थ्रू आउट द डे. 2 क्लास होंगी या 1 क्लास होगी, ठीक है, हाफ डे लेके जा भी सकती हैं, ठीक है, और अपने बच्चे को अपने स्कूल में एडमिशन भी दिला सकती हैं ताकि अपने बच्चे को वहीं देख लें. द प्रॉब्लम इज दैट स्कूल टीचर female is not just a female teacher, she is a mother as well, and being mother, she has to look after her child, and our society considers somehow this child caring practice as something that is to be done by women. And therefore, she has to juggle between these two positions. One that is achieved status as a school teacher, and second is ascribed status as mother. Okay. And when she juggles, she has to juggle between these two positions. What she would prefer in terms of the job would be the one that would give her enough time to look after her family members as well. Therefore, therefore, she would opt for a job that would be like a part-time as well. You would find part-time jobs being done largely by women, or jobs where women do not have to stay for long till night. A job where she can easily, you know, uh, uh, you know, a job that she can easily exit without any condition, any long-term obligation. Okay. So when you already have so much responsibilities, okay, familial responsibilities, and it is the responsibilities that family has, the society has imposed on women, then obviously when she would try to look out of the window to seek opportunity outside, she would try to find those opportunities only that would not compromise her domestic activities, that would not compromise with her domestic activities. Okay, because what she does in the work is only one shift, and after coming back from work she has to do second shift. This is an idea given by the idea of second shift, Arlie Hochschild, that woman does more labor than men and she has to do labor at both the fronts. बाहर भी करना है और घर आके भी फिर से काम करना है. मैन का क्या है? काम कर लिया, आके खाना खा लिया, सो गए, टीवी देख लिया. लेकिन वुमेन को सारा टाइम करना है. पहले वो बाहर जाएगी, वहां काम करेगी, उसके बाद घर आके अपने बच्चे का, अपने हस्बैंड का. ही हैज टू डू सेकंड शिफ्ट. ओके. और ये चीज प्रॉब्लमेटिक है. एंड सिंस शी हैज टू डू सेकंड शिफ्ट एट होम, इसलिए द फर्स्ट शिफ्ट would be the one she would prefer. First shift, one that is not going to bear a lot of burden, that is not going to create a lot of burden for her. इसलिए वो हल्की जॉब लेगी और वो वुमेन्स जॉब बनते जाती है. ऐसी कई लेडीज ने सोचो, ऑल दी लेडीज थॉट अबाउट हैविंग अ जॉब that would not compromise, that would not, you know, weigh heavy on their domestic shift. When all these kind of women make such choices, these choices translate into what we call as women's work. ऐसा होता है, ये होता है. ठीक है. हाँ, हमारी नानी दादी कब से बोल रही है, बात सही है. बट हमारी नानी दादी जो है ना, वो स्टडीज, इंपेरिकल स्टडी नहीं करती. हाँ, टर्म का जो क्रेडिट है वो तो उन्होंने ले लिया. ठीक है. ओके, तो ये हो गया विमेंस जेंडर का जो सर्टिफिकेशन है. नाउ द क्वेश्चन इज, वो जो टर्म है पहले मैं वो बता देता हूं, आर्ली हॉकशाइल्ड का. सेकेंड शिफ्ट, second shift, and second shift is simply nothing but घर पे आके वापस से काम करना is second shift. To come back to house again and to do the domestic work, that is second shift. And therefore since there is a role conflict, basically it's a role conflict position. Okay, and there is role strain as well. The domestic work demands more than the work at this workplace. ठीक है, because domestic responsibility can have larger consequences on her health, mental and physical. Okay, that may even that may even lead to breakdown of the family. Okay, so domestic actually leads to role strain, and there is role conflict as well between domestic work and the work outside. And therefore second shift is something that would be there, and the first shift would be preferred in such a fashion that would give her enough leverage to not compromise with her second shift. ठीक है. Secondly, जो vertical हमने देखा, in vertical we saw this was occupied by or filled by women, and this was largely filled by men. The question is, what happens? Why don't you see women up here? Because there is a ceiling. एक सीलिंग है. सीलिंग क्या होता है? छत होती है. छत को आप पार नहीं कर सकते हो. आप छत को पार नहीं कर सकते. ठीक है, बट ये जो छत है ये ग्लास की है, यानी आप देख सकते हो छत के ऊपर क्या है, बट आप कभी तोड़ नहीं पाओगे. तो देयरफॉर इट वाज कॉल्ड एज ग्लास सीलिंग. You can see through this ceiling what lies beyond this ceiling, but you cannot break it. Therefore, glass ceiling. She knows what lies ahead of these positions, but she cannot make it to those positions. Glass ceiling. And therefore, you would not see most of the chief executive positions or managerial positions being filled by women. Largely, they would be occupied by men. And this is nothing but exclusionary social closure. Frank Parkin. Men have hoarded the opportunities at the topmost strata. Men have hoarded the opportunity at the topmost strata. They would not let women enter into this strata. And this exclusionary social closure operates in every field. Exclusionary social closure. राइट, एंड दिस इज, और ये क्या है? ये हमने एक ऑर्गेनाइजेशन की बात करी, वन ऑर्गेनाइजेशन. ओके, विच ऑर्गेनाइजेशन? वर्क ऑर्गेनाइजेशन. नाउ if instead of one organization, if I start talking about millions of organizations, millions, okay, millions, you would see this thing million times. Millions of times you would see this thing. And then if I talk not just only about economic organization, if I start talking about political organization, you would start looking at this thing as in billion of times. Okay, and that simply is nothing but a way to move from what seems to appear as personal to the public. And then you would see at the helm of society men sitting, and then we would call it democracy. कैसे होता है डेमोक्रेसी? तो पूरा रूट तक जब आप जाओगे आपको पता चलेगा कि डेमोक्रेसी सिर्फ एक स्मोक स्क्रीन है. स्मोक स्क्रीन. ओके, democracy is exactly equal to that glass ceiling. You know that you can be there, but you also know that you cannot be. Okay, you can aspire to be that, but you can never be that. Democracy is nothing but aspiration only. Democracy is an ideology that is actually what I would say an ideology that runs on the idea of aspirations, ambitions, and merit. Everyone is going to have equal opportunity. But within an organization, we saw is not. And this is what creates unequal distribution of wealth, income, and power status. Okay. Now this was one stratification. Now I'll talk about within gender and work. I'll also talk about some more phenomena like gender wage gap. और ये सब मैं कहाँ बता रहा हूँ? Same context, gender and work. You also see gender wage gap. Okay, wage differentials. For a work, any sort of work, since you know that men and women are occupying different sort of work profiles, so obviously you would also see different sort of income. But men's position would be getting higher one and women's position would be getting lower ones. And also you would see for the same job, men getting higher than women for the same job. ऐसा भी नहीं कि different jobs. For the same job, you would see men are getting higher income. Okay. Why? The question lies in the process of interview. When men, and there are many studies which are conducted at the level of interview as well. When men are interviewed by the organizations, it is noticed that men have more bargaining power than women. Women do not have bargaining power. Okay. And since she do not have bargaining power, he lose the opportunity to be at par with men. And therefore, despite same job, men would be getting higher one than women. And women also does not get enough experience in the work profile. Why? Because of biological constraints as well. Menstrual cycle, pregnancy, ultimately, these are the two biological constraints that make her leave the job. Okay. And that is very natural. If men were to face these problems, even men would also have left the jobs. And therefore, we talk about maternity benefit. That they should get benefit of doubt for this. In the sense, not doubt, in the sense, since it is a biological constraint, they should be given entitlement. The problem is that they would take 9-month leave, 10-month leave. And in those 10 months, that same man who was recruited along with her has already achieved higher position and she has lost. In those 9 months, अब वो आएगी भी तो she would not be at par with the same man who was recruited along with her. He is already lagged behind. Okay. ये सब चीजें हैं. Gender and work. Okay. Now, next I would talk about gender and power. Gender and politics. Okay. Gender and politics. ये भी वही सेम चीज है. I mean, ज़्यादा कोई डिफरेंस है नहीं. आइडिया वही है, फिलोसफी वही है. अब इकोनॉमिक ऑर्गेनाइजेशन की जगह पॉलिटिकल ऑर्गेनाइजेशन है. चीज वही है, बाकी ज्यादा डिफरेंस आपको मिलेगा नहीं. पॉलिटिक्स में भी आप यू वुड सी अमर्त्य सेन है, जैसे उन्होंने एक कॉन्सेप्ट दिया है मिसिंग वुमेन. ओके, सो आई एम जस्ट पॉइंटिंग आउट सम कॉन्सेप्ट्स दैट यू कैन नोट. बाकी चीज मेरे को बताने की जरूरत नहीं है, सेम ही है. यू कैन यूज दीज कीवर्ड्स. ये कीवर्ड्स आपको ज्यादा काम आएंगे. ठीक है, अमर्त्य सेन, मिसिंग वुमेन. एंड देन even at the level of panchayat, we have the concept of, in panchayat you see this क्या बोलते हैं इसको, सरपंच पति. सरपंच पति And then you can also talk about global gender gap index, जो अभी निकला है, global gender gap index 2021, which has placed India 140 out of 150. In this index, there are 3-4 indices. One index is that of, within this global gender gap report, there is one index of political empowerment or women's participation in politics. You would see women's participation in politics has declined in comparison to the last year global gender gap report, from 23 to 9%. This was the kind of data that 2021 report told us, declined. Okay, तो ये सब चीजें हैं जो आप बोल सकते, ठीक है, और ज्यादा कुछ है नहीं. Okay, similarly you can talk about gender and education as well. You know, these are the things, यहाँ पे आपको जीएस भी काम आ सकता है, पर ज्यादा नहीं करना है, आपको थ्योरीज वही रखनी है. जीएस का आप डेटा शायद यूज कर लो, 1-2 पॉइंट, ज्यादा नहीं, ज्यादा भी नहीं करना है. Okay, you can talk about dropout amongst women. Okay, you can also talk about the absence of women in the higher education. Okay, there are some other factors as well other than these that you can talk about, which जो मैं आगे आगे आपको बताऊंगा आगे के चैप्टर्स में. वर्क एंड इकोनॉमी भी हमने पढ़ना है, उसमें बता सकूंगा, ठीक है. Now the last topic, social mobility. And yes, remember one more thing. When you deal with these type of things, okay, certification हो गया या फिर जैसे politics society हो गया, you can always mention any step that is taken by government to fix these things. For example, if I have pointed out glass ceiling, if I have pointed out missing women, if I have pointed out gender wage gap, so you can also talk about the steps taken by government to fix them. वो steps कितना काम करें कितना नहीं वो हमारा कंसर्न नहीं, हमको तो बस लिख के आ जाना है कि भाई, although there are these concerns, government on the other hand has taken these steps to counter them. We cannot say these are successful or unsuccessful steps, but we can only simply objectively point out these are some of the steps taken by government to fix these. ऐसा एक थोड़ा जीएस वाला लाइन आप लिख सकते हो लास्ट में. Okay, only in the last statement, that should be the last statement. Okay, so that you do not end the answer in a pessimist tone. Okay, we should not sound pessimist, but वो तो लिखना ही है, लेकिन एंड जो है हमें थोड़ा गवर्नमेंट के एक सजेशन से कर देना चाहिए, ठीक है. नाउ सोशल मोबिलिटी. The question is, one more thing I forgot to tell you in gender and certification. One scholar, okay, there is one scholar which is important. In fact, I should have mentioned her. Let us go back to gender certification. One scholar that I would like to mention after all those details, now that you know differentials in income, power, wealth, and all those things, I would like to conclude by talking about scholar like Sylvia Walby. Sylvia Walby is very important scholar basically. Okay, very important scholar. Sylvia Walby is talking about structures of patriarchy which regulate women's life chances. Structures of patriarchy that regulate women's life chances. Life chances का मीनिंग आपको पता है, अपॉर्चुनिटीज जो होती हैं उसको रेगुलेट करता है. कुछ स्ट्रक्चर्स है पेट्रियार्की के जो रेगुलेट करते हैं. एंड शी हैज टॉक्ड अबाउट 6 स्ट्रक्चर्स. 6 स्ट्रक्चर्स, इसको आप याद रख लेना क्योंकि ये वो स्ट्रक्चर्स हैं जो आपको काम आएंगे. होलिस्टिक है काफी, इसने सारे कवर कर दिए. इनफैक्ट फर्स्ट इज पेड वर्क. पेड वर्क, ओके. पेड वर्क, basically she is trying to tell us this is one structure that regulate women's life chances. Why? Because men are more in paid work and women are less than nothing, in fact very close to nothing in the paid work. Most of the women are found in unpaid work, that is domestic housewives. Okay, so paid work is a thing that regulates automatically, gives you power. Therefore, men possess more power over women because they are the breadwinners, and this automatically regulates women's life. Okay, paid work. And the idea of which work should be paid is also highly patriarchal. Which work should not be paid, which work should be paid is patriarchal. If you're not calling women's work as a work that should be qualified to be called as paid work, that again it's a patriarchal mindset and patriarchal notion of work. We do not call it work. Okay. And here you can also talk about that some the campaign against housewife campaign for the demand for the wage for housework that was going on in South India as well, which actually had assumed national character. Okay. Second is family, household. Okay, family and household. These are also the things that regulate women's life chances. Okay. Third, cultural institutions. Cultural institutions also regulate women's life chances. Cultural institution means, see, consider like this. When woman gets married, she has to go to the house of male member. Okay? We have patrilocal conceptions. Patrilocal क्या होता है? This is known as patrilocal. Patri का मतलब आपको पता है, local मतलब घर, residence. ये patrilocal conception है हमारे यहाँ पे. Okay, कि when woman gets married, she has to go to the house of the male member. And when you are going to someone else's house, you are getting detached from your roots. आप 20 साल 25 साल अपनी फैमिली के साथ रहे, एक शहर में रहे, अपने मेंबर्स के साथ रहे, अपने दोस्तों के साथ रहे, अब सडनली नई जगह चले गए, उस नई जगह में किसका डोमिनेंस है? उस आदमी का है जिसके पास गए। तो वो जानता है उस जगह को ऊपर से नीचे, मैं यहाँ पे रहा हूँ 10 साल से, मुझे पता है यहाँ पे कैसे लोग हैं, बाहर नहीं जाओगे तुम। स्ट्रक्चरली आ गया ये तो स्ट्रक्चरली आना ही है, ठीक है। कल्चरल इंस्टीट्यूशन भी रेगुलेट करते हैं वुमेन्स के लाइफ चांस। द आइडिया ऑफ पतिव्रता, एक तो वो छोड़ गया ये घर, उसके बाद यू हैव टू बी पतिव्रता एज वेल, इन द सेंस यू हैव टू वर्शिप योर हस्बैंड। एंड पतिव्रता as a concept, Vedic concept, it's a Vedic concept, Pativrata. Pativrata as a concept implies obedience and conformity. That you cannot be shouting on your husband, you are Pativrata, Pati is Parmeshwar. Okay, you cannot be seen as someone who is shouting on your husband. Okay. Next, and also, you would see that there is a thing what we call as in sociology identity adoption bias. Generally what happens is, suppose if a woman contests elections, okay, politics is seen as domain of men, but when woman is going to contest election, you would see that to win she would also have to be like a man. Since politics is domain of men, you would see women speaking in very loud voice, okay, on microphone or on mic, or conducting rallies and waving hands and shouting like men only on the same issues that are raised by men, okay. And therefore, to be successful in a world dominated by men, you have to be like man. This is also an identity adoption bias that she has to struggle with, and which is nothing a part of cultural institution. Okay. Next, sexuality. Sexuality. Sexuality also regulates her. Why? See, the problem with our society is when you see a man who has had sex with 10 or 20 women, he is celebrated figure, stud. We call him stud. ये बंदा stud है भाई. But when you see a woman who has had sex with 10 or 20, you call her slut. And these two labels are highly opposite to each other and connote very two different meanings. Stud means victorious. Okay. Stud का मतलब उसने जीत हासिल करी है. And this reproduces the notion of dominance of man over woman, that woman has to be dominated over by men. And if man has had relation with women multiple times, he is the man. Okay. And if women tries to do the same thing, she is not the woman. Okay, she is not a woman. ये लड़की कौन है ये? ठीक है. We start labeling her. So sexual double standards are still alive. Okay. Sexuality regulates her life chances. Then, and the next one is violence towards women. Violence towards women is also one of the institution or structure that regulates women's life chances. Violence towards women. Okay. Now, violence towards women is not only the physical one. It is not only physical one. The domestic violence that we call this, that is only one aspect of violence. There are symbolic violence, the form, multiple forms of symbolic violence. Symbolic violence is a term coined by Bourdieu. What is symbolic violence? You know, when you see a woman, when she goes to the family of the man, he has to adopt the culture of that family. Okay. And when she has to adopt culture of that family, and sometime what happens is, in the whole process of adoption, she may have to do things that she herself do not subscribe to. Okay, she may have to put on very heavy jewelry. कभी कभी ऐसा होता है, आप ऐसे घर में चले गए जहाँ पे जवाहरात हीरे पहनना जरूरी है, जब गेस्ट आए तो उनको पता चले कि हमारी घर की बहू है. Okay, and that may not be in compliance with her will, and that is symbolic violence. वो symbolic violence है. उसमें मार नहीं पड़ रही है, बट मार पड़ रही है क्योंकि आप उसकी विल के अगेंस्ट हो रहा है वो. Okay. Sati was also nothing but symbolic violence, that you have to be so much loyal to your husband that if he is dead, you also have to die along with him. That is symbolic violence. If women are not given opportunities to study as much at par with men, that is symbolic violence. Social exclusion is nothing but symbolic violence only. Okay. Violence towards women. See, like for example, Anne Oakley, who's talked about alienation of housewives. He would call housework as symbolic violence. Why housework is symbolic violence? According to Anne Oakley, because she believes that housework is not letting women to explore her creativity and potential that she is having naturally, but has been subdued socially by men. Okay. And the last structure is state. State is highly patriarchal. According to Sylvia Wolby, state is highly patriarchal. The laws that state would have would unconsciously or consciously favor male more than female. The laws that we have in our society are going to favor men over women. What is to be seen as rape and what not to be seen as rape is decided by male members. Okay, the lawmakers are male, parliamentarians are male. They will decide what is rape and what is not. And therefore, marital rape is not recognized. Okay, so this is what the idea of state being patriarchal according to Wolby would be. Okay, हमको सिर्फ ये पॉइंट्स लिखने हैं, ये 6 पॉइंट्स. सारा इतना डिटेल मत लिखना अनलेस कुछ ऐसा क्वेश्चन आए. इसका चांस होता है, रेयरली ऐसा होता है क्वेश्चन कि किसी एक एस्पेक्ट पे पूछ लें, बट कम चांस है. लार्जली आपको ज्यादा ध्यान ये रखना है कि आपको ये पॉइंट्स पता रहने चाहिए, बाकी तो अब भर दोगे. Sylvia Wolby also tells us one more thing that you can write in the exam, that in the era of women empowerment today, what is happening? She is saying that there was a point of time when women were absent in the public sphere. That means in the work profile or politics. They did not have right to vote. They did not have right to work. They had nothing. They were circumscribed or confined to household. And then gradually, when they were confined to household, because of sexual division of labor, then what was happening? He was victim of private patriarchy. ये इसका term है. Private patriarchy. Private patriarchy means women being victim to that individual man inside the house. This is private patriarchy. And then when women started gaining recognition in politics, in work, in education, gradually you saw some of the women, a large wave of women coming into these sectors that she was deprived of for a very long time. Okay, so when she gained recognition in these fields that were seen as male domain, what happened? Male tried to resist her, to push her back. घर जाओ अपने, ठीक है, ये तुम्हारे बस की नहीं है, छोड़ो. अरे गाड़ी चलाना तुम्हारे बस की नहीं, छोड़ो. The moment we just think like this, you give license to women and then men would say, अरे लड़कियां नहीं चला पाएंगी, गाड़ी छोड़ो. ठीक है, ऐसे करके. This is nothing but a resistance to this new found freedom amongst women, because earlier what was the norm that woman has to stay at home. So when you give freedom to women, you would also see resistance coming in from men. And when you see resistance coming in from men in different sphere, whether it is work or whether it is politics or whether it is education, you see these different resistance joining together and forming what Sylvia Volby calls as public patriarchy. And what is public patriarchy? Sexual harassment we had at home, now we had at workplace. पहले वायलेंस घर पे था, अब वायलेंस बाहर होएगा. ठीक है. Domestic violence at home translated into sexual harassment at workplace. So you would see the same thing being done. This is nothing but resistance by patriarchy. And she also believes that earlier women were vulnerable to that one individual man. Now she has the whole earth to get exploited. Okay. अब वो कहीं पे भी एक्सप्लॉइट हो सकती है. ये है प्रॉब्लम. Public patriarchy, private to public patriarchy. So the idea is, you just by giving them freedom to work, to be participant in politics, is not going to help them. It is the mindset that needs to be changed. The patriarchal mindset needs to be changed. Okay. Just by giving them opportunity is not going to help. In the work sphere, you need to have safe conditions for women, safe and secure. Otherwise, they will be victim to the same thing that she was a victim of back in household. Okay. Now, last topic, that is social mobility. अभी एक ब्रेक लेता हूं पहले मैं 5 मिनट. Audible? It's very easy topic. जल्दी खत्म हो जाएगा. What is mobility? Mobility is nothing like this. I'm moving. This is mobility. यहाँ से वहाँ move कर रहा हूँ. Mobility. What is social mobility? When you are not moving from one to another place, but when your social position changes. Okay, that is social mobility. So we will define it: change in social position with respect to anything like occupation, income, prestige, पावर, एटसेट्रा। सारा टाइम देखो मैक्स वेबर को यूज कर रहा हूं मैं, सारा टाइम, क्योंकि ये सब उसी का बताया हुआ है। इनकी इनकम, प्रेस्टीज, पावर उसी का दिया हुआ। नाउ सोशल मोबिलिटी is of multiple types. Multiple classifications are there of social mobility. Okay. So I'll talk about the types of social mobility. Types. Social mobility. One classification is this: horizontal and vertical. Horizontal social mobility and vertical social mobility. Second classification is like this: intergenerational and intra-generational. Intergenerational and intra-generational. Third is structural and individual. Structural and individual. Fourth is long range, short range. Long range, short range. And fifth is absolute and relative. These are 5 types of social mobility. इसके बियॉन्ड कुछ नहीं होता, ठीक है। फर्स्ट आई विल टॉक अबाउट हॉरिजॉन्टल एंड वर्टिकल। एक एक करके इसको निपटाते हैं। हॉरिजॉन्टल सोशल मोबिलिटी। सपोज I was earning 2 rupees per month 1 year back. Okay. Today I am earning 20 rupees. What is this? Vertical mobility or horizontal mobility? Vertical. Acha. Yesterday I was engineer. Today I am sociologist. Vertical or horizontal? हॉरिजॉन्टल। चलो मतलब ये तो तुम्हें समझ गए इतना तो, ठीक है। Yesterday I was engineer, today I am chief engineer. Vertical. सिंपल है ये तो. अच्छा, yesterday I was Hindu, today I am Buddhist. Horizontal. ठीक है. क्योंकि no religion is superior to any other. Religions are only different. But after social mobility, I'll just talk about some conceptual issues also in relation to these things. Okay, superiority and differences. Okay. So one thing is very clear: horizontal social mobility includes interreligious, inter-occupational, provided that change in occupation, the occupation that I chose now, is of same prestige and same status or same wealth. Approximation. Okay, that is also horizontal. If the occupation that now I have entered into is of higher prestige, higher status and higher wealth, then that would be vertical. But this one is for the same one, if they are in same level. Okay. And horizontal would also include lateral mobility. Lateral mobility. I was in Bihar, today I am in Delhi. What we call as geographical migration. That is lateral mobility. Change in place. Okay. Vertical is nothing but when whatever you defined in social mobility, you have achieved all the things in the upper indices. That is vertical mobility. Higher prestige, higher wealth, higher income, higher power. That is vertical mobility. Okay. But remember, vertical mobility is not always upward. जब नीचे टक्कर लगती है वो भी वर्टिकल है. Okay, so vertical can be both upward and downward. Both are vertical. A girl who is Brahmin in traditional Indian society, a Brahmin girl who married Shudra man, this kind of marriage was not permissible in the traditional Indian society. A Brahmin man could marry Shudra girl, but a Brahmin girl could not marry Shudra man. ये allowed नहीं था. Because when Brahmin girl marry Shudra man, the child of these two would be outcast and these two would also be outcasted. The child who is born out of these two people was labeled as Chandal. उसको चंडाल बोलते थे. जो ब्राह्मण लड़की और शूद्र लड़के के रिश्ते से जो पैदा हुआ है वो चंडाल कहलाता था, लड़का या लड़की जो पैदा हुई है या हुआ है. And Chandal is outcast. It is not part of Varna system. What is this? Which mobility? Vertical. Vertical में which one? Upward, downward? Downward. तो हम और specific हो गए vertical, downward. ठीक. I am Yadav. I have land. बहुत जमीनें हैं मेरे पास. With the help of this land, I have got lot of wealth. DLF वाले आए थे, उनको दे दिया मैंने एक पार्ट. क्या ऐश करो. DLF वालों से पैसा आ गया बहुत. ये पैसा मैंने इन्वेस्ट कर दिया पॉलिटिक्स में. जीप खरीद ली. ठीक है, पग से ले लिए बॉटल्स के, सबको बांट दिए, वोट करना मेरे लिए, बंदे हायर कर लिए, मैन पावर, जो दहशत फैलाएंगे गांव में जाके, वोट इन्हीं के लिए करना है। सब पैसे से आया मेरे पास, डीएलएफ को जमीन दी, पैसा आया, उससे ये सब करवाया। फाइनली मेरे पास पावर आ गई। नाउ आई हैव बिकम एमएलए। विच मोबिलिटी? अपवर्ड मोबिलिटी, अपवर्ड मोबिलिटी। ओके, नाउ रिमेंबर, this is upward mobility in terms of power and prestige, not in terms of income. ऑफिशियली इनकम तो उसको जमीन से ही आ रही थी, वो महीने के 12 लाख उसको रेंट आता था डीएलएफ से। अब वो एमएलए बन गया है, उसको 50,000 रुपए मिलेंगे। तो इनकम में भली ना हो, लेकिन बाकी जगह तो है, और जब ये दो है तो इनकम भी आ जाती है। When you have social capital, when you have cultural capital, when you have symbolic capital, you can also convert those capitals into economic capital, like money. ठीक है? Now next, intergenerational and intragenerational. My father was auto wala and I became administrative officer. This is intergenerational. In comparison to my father, who was just an auto wala, I have become officer. जनरेशन में एक वो चेंज आ गया। हाँ, मेरे फादर ये सब में कहा, एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन में। इंटरजनरेशन। Suppose my father was IAS officer and I have become recluse, or I have gotten indulged in lottery or bribery or corruption. This is also intergenerational, but downward vertically. यानी तीन को मिक्स कर दिया मैंने। इंटरजेनरेशनल भी है because now I am talking in comparison to my father. Okay. My father was IAS. I have become IPS. What is this? Intergenerational के आगे क्या लिखोगे? My father was IAS, I become IPS. Intergenerational horizontal है भाई। You cannot say IAS is supreme to IPS. Can you say that? ये तो बोल ही नहीं सकते आप। ये तो आपकी प्रेफरेंस होती है, आप प्रेफरेंस में उसको वन डालते हो, है नहीं वो वन। All the three, IAS, IPS and Indian Forest Service, not foreign, forests, all three are all India services. अब ये आपकी चॉइस है, कुछ लोग आईपीएस को भी नंबर 1 डालते हैं, ठीक है? So that was intergenerational horizontal. What is intragenerational? So intergenerational is with respect to father, not mother. ये प्रॉब्लम भी है इस कॉन्सेप्ट की, वो आगे बताऊंगा, फेमिनिस्ट थ्योरी आएगी उसमें, ठीक है? ये फादर के कंपैरिजन में क्यों देखा जा रहा है? इंट्राजेनरेशनल। इंट्राजेनरेशनल इज नथिंग भाई। इन माय फर्स्ट अटेम्प्ट आई बिकेम इंडियन रेवेन्यू सर्विस ऑफिसर, सेकंड अटेम्प्ट दिया, आईएएस बन गया। इंट्राजेनरेशनल, within one's own life, not in comparison to father, within one's own life. यानी within the same generation, not across generation. First attempt got IPS, second attempt IRS. Now this is intragenerational vertically downward here. Why? Because I did not get my preference, I got something that I did not prefer. So therefore to me it is vertically downward intragenerational. Okay. Next is long range, short range. I am a member of working class, lower working class. Okay, lower working class member I am. I gave entrance exam, I cleared it, and I joined middle class automatically because now I have got perks, allowances, wealth hai, government job hai, prestige hai. Pehle I was just lower working class. I used to simply uh, what do you do? I mean, you were doing something which is seen part of lower working class due to wealth. The kind of income that you generated was not enough for you to sustain yourself over a long period of time. But from lower working class, you just gave one exam and then you cleared it and you have joined the rank, prestigious rank. That amounts to be called as part of middle class. So from lower working class, you entered into middle class. So this is short range. Short range. लोअर वर्किंग क्लास से आप मिडिल क्लास पहुंच गए और लोअर वर्किंग क्लास और मिडिल क्लास में ज्यादा फासला नहीं होता है. क्यों नहीं होता है? ऐसा होता है, देखो, वर्किंग क्लास इज डिवाइडेड इनटू अपर एंड लोअर and then comes middle. Middle also has multiple components like upper middle, middle, and lower middle. And you, from lower working class, you have entered into lower middle class or middle class. That is short range. ज़्यादा फासला नहीं पार किया आपने. But from lower working class, if you enter into upper middle or upper class, that is long range. That is long range. यहाँ पे आप कैसे पहुंचे थे? एसएससी देकर, स्टाफ सिलेक्शन कमीशन. यहां पहुंच गए यूपीएससी देकर. Something like this. Long range. Last one is, अच्छा नहीं, लास्ट नहीं, इसके बाद एक और है, स्ट्रक्चरल एंड इंडिविजुअल. स्ट्रक्चरल एंड इंडिविजुअल कुछ भी नहीं होता है. By structural mobility is the result of structural changes in society. Your position got changed because of not your own will, not your own attempt, but because of structural changes in society. Suppose computers were introduced in India for the first time during Rajiv Gandhi's regime. Structural change हुआ. Okay, IT टेक्नोलॉजी आई, सर्विस सेक्टर आया, ये स्ट्रक्चरल चेंज था. This structural change helped you to become from a typist or a typewriter, typist, to a software engineer, because now computer have come in, courses had started running like software professional, be software professional. Courses had started coming in like Java, C++. So people learned them, they adapted to those practices and codes, languages, and they became software professional. From blue collar, they had now become white collar. But this was structural mobility. Also, it is vertical mobility, from unskilled to skilled. From blue collar to white collar, vertical also, upward. And it can also be intergenerational in comparison to your father. Your father was typist. and you have, so therefore you would see this is nothing but ideal types. All these are ideal types. They are not found mutually exclusively in the reality. These are categories. Okay. In one category, you can find elements of other as well. Structural mobility. Okay. Demonetization happened. Structural change in society. Many people lost their jobs because of demonetization. Shops got closed. People lost their livelihood. What kind of mobility? Structural, vertical, downward, intra-generational, or could be intergenerational, whatever that may be, mainly intra-generational, क्योंकि within one's lifetime उसने देखा अमीर से गरीबी में आ गया वो, ठीक है. But demonetization also led to many people climb up the ladder. कई लोग बहुत अमीर भी बने हैं demonetization. Many people achieved vertical upward mobility also. That was structural. Had it not been for the demonetization, they would not have become what they have. All their companies, digital wallet companies, had started proliferating like anything. Digital wallets का concept एकदम norm बन गया था वो, norm. तो पेटीएम होना was now common sense. फोन पे, एयरटेल का जो वॉलेट है, ये सब proliferate करने शुरू हो गए थे, छोटे छोटे वॉलेट्स demonetization के. So those companies and the people working in those companies had gained mobility. Informal sector was victim of structural, vertical, downward. Formal was getting benefits of structural, vertical, upward. The people who were on the other side of digital divide, the rural India, was victim of structural, vertical, downward, and urban was structural, vertical, upward. Simple. Now next is individual. आपको मालूम ही है, जो अभी तक हमने पढ़ा इंडिविजुअल ही है largely. Structural is because of the structural changes in society you achieve mobility. Individual is that not with respect to changes in structure, you achieve mobility all by yourself without change in structure. That is what individual mobility is. वो तो हम देखते ही आए हैं. Okay. Absolute mobility. Absolute mobility, and we'll talk about relative. Absolute mobility means in comparison to your previous generation, that is intergenerational basically, or even in comparison to your own lifetime, but 10 years back, you have achieved a position that is absolutely superior in comparison to your own life 10 years back, and in comparison to your generation, previous generation, you have achieved a position absolute. Okay. But when you compare yourself with your friends, you would see your friends have achieved even higher mobility in that time, in those 10 years. So relatively, you are still downward. Absolutely, with respect to yourself and your family, previous generation, you have achieved upward. This is absolute. But in relation to your friends, you are still नीचे ही. So relatively, you are downward. Absolutely, you may be upward. समझे कि नहीं समझे? समझ गए ना? So absolute is with respect to oneself and one's family or generation. Relative is with respect to one's peer group. Okay. You and your friend, you started business together. Okay. You have become crorepati, millionaire. That man has become trillionaire, trillionaire. So you have achieved absolute mobility, but in relation to that, relatively you are downward. Okay. And therefore, when we say democracy is open, we always say relatively open to theocracy. Okay. But democracy is not absolutely open. It is only relatively open. And you would also find theocracy being relatively open in some things which democracy is not relatively open to. You would find in the end, जो मैं आखिर में बताऊंगा, कि no society is absolutely open or no society is absolutely closed. When we say a society is open or closed, we say in terms of the social mobility, whether you can see yourself down the line 10, 15 years afterwards in that position. That means, is society giving you enough opportunity really so that you can reap the benefit and move upward? If society is giving you lot of flexibility, not only in terms of opportunity but also in terms of means to reap those opportunities, then in that society there will be high mobility. If in a society enough opportunities are not given, and even if they are given, the means are not given to achieve those opportunities, then that society may be open, but in relation to this, it is closed. It may be open in relation to its previous 100 years. Okay. ऐसे देखना पड़ता है बेसिकली, ये कहने की कोशिश कर. So this is all about social mobility. Now I'll talk about, remember, this concept of social mobility is largely given by Petrin, Sorokin. Horizontal and vertical is also given by Petrin, Sorokin. Intergenerational and intragenerational is given by Bendix and Lipset. Bendix and Lipset. बाकियों को आपको याद करने की जरूरत नहीं, ये तो आपको याद रखना है. Bendix and Lipset. Now I'll talk about some important social mobility studies. Some important studies on social mobility. Because आप ऐसे सिर्फ ब्लैक बोर्ड पे ऐसे लिखकर नहीं बता सकते हो कौन सी सोसाइटी ओपन है कौन सी क्लोज है. यू हैव टू कंडक्ट स्टडीज. आपको सैंपल लेना पड़ेगा. आई मीन, टू अ कॉमन मैन, India is a democratic Middle East country like Iran or Iraq is not democratic. So India is open and that is closed. This is what common sense perception would be. Okay. We have to, before we compare two societies, any two society, okay, we have to take into consideration multiple factors. We cannot simply say that this is democracy, this is not democracy, therefore it is open. That is very commonsensical thing. Multiple factors have gone into the making of society. Each society has its own history, has its own context. Okay, so you cannot compare BMW with Maruti. You just cannot compare. Both belong to two different bracket and range. To say that BMW is more luxurious and Maruti is not would be wrong comparison. May sound right to a common man, but would be wrong comparison. Okay. So some social mobility studies are important therefore. social mobility studies. I'll talk about 3-4 important studies here. One, and that is also considered as or seen as classical study, was conducted by, in fact, it is called as first study on mobility. That was conducted by a person called Glass. Okay, Glass, British. He was a British citizen. Okay. What he did, he conducted survey in 1949 on 4,000 males. Okay. Of course, you cannot say any society open unless you take sample. एक sample आपको लेना पड़ेगा. And he conducted, and in his sample he had 4,000 members. Okay, all were males, to study mobility among them. Okay. What did Glass do with these 4,000 male? To all the 4,000 males, Glass asked, basically what happens in a survey, it is like a survey only. You are giving a questionnaire, okay, or you ask questions to the other person before you get knowledge on anything. So, to these 4,000 members, there were 3 or 4 questions that were asked by Glass. One question was, how much are you earning today? And where are you working? Very basic question. Where do you work? What do you work as? यानी आपकी पोजीशन क्या है उस प्रोफाइल में? And how much do you earn? Very basic question. And where were you before you had joined this company? And what are your qualifications? जैसे इंटरव्यू में पूछा जाता है किसी कंपनी में आप ज्वाइन करते हो. These are the basic questions that is asked. Just a second. Hello? 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 ठीक है. So these are the questions that was asked. Okay. And finally, Glass found questionnaire consisted of questions related to class origin and class destination. Class origin and class destination. That means पहले क्या करते थे, कहाँ थे, क्या पढ़ा था, and अब क्या कर रहे हो, destination. And Glass found out, see, it's very simple. If you find today in destination that you have higher prestige, higher wealth, income, power, in comparison to class origin, you would say you have achieved mobility, upward, vertical. Maybe intergenerational or maybe intergenerational. Okay, that can also be part of the questionnaire. Okay, so what did Glass find? He found Britain in 1949 as closed. He found Britain as pretty much closed. Why? देखो. He found Britain pretty closed. With little mobility. And that too mostly from manual occupation to semi-manual. That means it was short range mobility. 4,000 people were surveyed, questionnaire was asked, it was found all of them, mostly 98%, shifted from manual to semi-manual. They tried for higher, but they settled for the semi-manual. This is the max that they could achieve. This is what Glass is telling us. Okay. They aimed for higher, but they settled for semi-manual. And what he did, he talked about 6 kind of classes in Britain. 6 classes. Okay. In that 6th class, this is the 6th and this is the 5th. How? The 6 classes are, first, the topmost class was professional. High administrative. Second was managerial. Executive. Third was inspectional. Supervisory. Fourth was skilled manual. Routine grade. Fifth, semi-skilled manual. Which is partially skilled. Sixth, unskilled manual. Completely unskilled. And Glass, when he conducted survey on 4,000 people, he found mobility from here till here. Now structure looks very open. That means you can achieve position till here. But what could be achieved at max was from here to here. Would you call it open society? Difficult. We cannot. Because mobility is very short range, shortest of range. That is not what amounts to be called as feature of open society. Open society is like, see, every one of those people were given equal opportunity. But they could settle till here only. Okay. This is what Glass has found. Now, what is basically, you would see the message of every social mobility study is that in every pyramid, you see lakhs of people at the downward strata. On the topmost strata, you find very few. You do not see those lakhs of people in the bottommost coming at the top also. Whether it is India, whether it is America, whether it is tribal, whether it is China. So how can you say one is open, one is closed? You cannot say. So what would we say at max? At max, what we would say? At max, we would say, what is the criteria for very few people to go and to make it to that top position? Is it based on meritocracy? Or is it based on racism, sexism, casteism, and other factors, discrimination, any sort of? If it is based on meritocracy, is it really merit? Or in the name of merit, racism is operational? So there are many factors that goes into the making of these things. Okay, so one study is Glass. Second important study This is very important one. In fact, the most important one, Goldthorpe. This is another man, again Britisher. Okay, the study conducted in the year 1963 on affluent workers. Now, what is this affluent workers? This is a term coined by Goldthorpe, affluent workers. Affluent workers. You know, Goldthorpe is raising a very important question. In Britain during 1960s, the automobile revolution had come. Okay, many factories had started establishing automobile factories. Okay, and with the establishment of automobile industry, structural mobility came in. Many people got multiple opportunities because of automobility, and this happens when there is structural change in society. Opportunities open up for multiple people. These people got opportunity to be a part of automobile industry. They started earning much more wealth in comparison to what they were doing before. Okay, so they joined Maruti, something like this. Okay, Maruti or BMW, whatever that may be. They started getting thousands of rupees or thousands of pounds, something like that. Okay, now these people had become relatively intra-generationally, they had achieved mobility due to structural change in society. That was structural mobility. But would you call them, really would you call them people who should be called as middle or upper class just because they have started earning money now? Goldthorpe says, to be qualified as upper or middle, you do not need only wealth or money, you need to have status and taste also. तभी आप बोलोगे ये मिडल है और अपर. So he found in one day he was having a cup of chai. He was reading newspaper, and then the front line, the front page of the newspaper was something like this: that these many people have got, due to automobile revolution, these people have got this much of wealth now. They are enjoying all those things. Okay, but Goldthorpe, when he conducted study amongst those people, he found out the kind of habits these people have. They are investing their money in lottery, gambling. These are not the people who can qualify to be called as middle or upper class just because they have wealth now. The kind of habits they have, they do not reinvest their money. They do not have investment habits. Savings nahi hai. How can we call them middle class just because they are earning money? This is a new kind of thing that Goldthorpe has talked about. So middle class is not just about wealth, it is also equally about values, which these people, so-called affluent workers, just because they have started earning money, did not have. Okay. So I'll dictate you few points. What Goldthorpe observed is something that I will tell you. First, he observed that manual workers of assembly line had earned high wages. Their increasing affluence made news headlines. Headline was like this: we are middle class now. Okay. But Goldthorpe claimed, इसको लिख ही लो, Goldthorpe claimed, although they had started earning higher, but they lacked values and attitude. They lacked values and attitude, values, attitude, and morals, because they had no bank accounts. They had no bank account, comma, no political knowledge. उन्हें कुछ पता ही नहीं है क्या चल रहा है, यानी civic culture, civic engagement भी नहीं है लोगों की. No political knowledge, comma, no job security, comma, paid weekly instead of monthly, and they were also paid weekly instead of monthly. They were paid weekly instead of monthly. ओके ये भी एक कैटेगरी होती है क्लासिफिकेशन की हायरार्की में. इफ यू आर पेड एवरी डे देन यू आर सीन एज लो क्लास प्रेस्टीज वाइज. इफ यू आर पेड every day and then every week you are seen as low. You may be paid higher amount but you are seen as low status because per day and per week is that of जैसे बोलते हैं दिहाड़ी वर्कर. जैसे दिहाड़ी नहीं बोलते हैं, दिहाड़ी समझते हो, डेली वेज अर्नर जिसे कहते हैं, वो इनफॉर्मल वाला सेक्टर जो है उसकी फील आती है. भले यू मे बी अर्निंग हाई बट यू वुड नॉट बी गिवन स्टेटस. ओके रिया, क्या हो गया रिया को? कांट हेयर. अच्छा उसका माइक ऑन है. अपना माइक ऑफ कर दिया करो यार जब लोग आते हो सबके सब. माइक अपने ऑफ कर दिया करो बस. अभी आ रही है वॉइस? ठीक है. So what Goldthorpe actually concluded was that these people could not be called as middle class just because they have started earning money. They lacked attitude, moral behavior, and political knowledge. They did not have job security, although they did not have saving habit or investment practices. And therefore, only, this was his conclusion, because he had conducted survey on 80 people, 80. Conclusion was that out of 80, only 2 would qualify to be called as middle class. The rest 78 did not qualify to be called as middle class because they did not have that habit, knowledge, values, moral. Only 2 had those. So all those 80 had same wealth, but only 2 were accepted as middle class. The rest did not. Okay. Only 2 out of 80 were accepted as middle class. Middle class by other middle class groups. What does it mean? What does it mean? Absolute mobility, all 80 achieved. But only 2 could achieve relative mobility, vertical upward, in comparison to the rest 78. समझे कि नहीं? ठीक है. Now, similarly, there are many studies which are conducted. There are such 4 studies which are conducted. One was conducted on black coated workers. वो सब बहुत हैं. बाकी I'll give you in notes only. Okay. In India specific case also, there are many studies conducted by a survey conducting organization called IHDS. IHDS conduct social mobility studies in India, and IHDS has, through different surveys, the last survey was in 2021, this year only. Okay, the latest finding. Okay, you don't need to quote figures and uska time bhi nahi milega tumhe. You just need to remember one important fact which they pointed out every time. They point out the same thing, that in India the mobility may be absolute, but relatively is always poor. In relation to what? You would see that in India, SCs, STs, OBCs, women, specifically minority women, disabled, which includes SC, ST, OBC, disabled, or SC woman who is disabled, intersectional. You would see the more you go into in the intersectional, you would see more and more, less and less mobility amongst them. Less and less. Upper caste Hindu men is having the highest mobility, according to them. Other lower caste Hindu men or women, in relation to these upper caste Hindu men, do not have. So reference group is this upper caste Hindu men. And these people try to achieve mobility as much as these people, but they always lack. And relatively, absolutely, they may have achieved higher position. Relatively, they would always be lower. So therefore, you would not be in a position to say society has become open. The more they become open, the more they also go open. And therefore, relatively, you would find closed system only. अंडरस्टैंडिंग और नॉट? ठीक है ना? तो इसलिए ओपन क्लोज कहना आसान काम नहीं है. SCs, STs, OBCs, women, minority women, Muslim women is further marginalized in the category of women. Okay, Muslim women is not as advantageously placed in India in comparison to Hindu women. So you would find Hindu women having more mobility in comparison to Muslim women. Muslim women do not even get opportunities to get a basic education. Okay, because of the fundamentalist nature or the fundamentalist practices or interpretation of some people who are radical, do not allow women to get education. Okay. So these are always, you would find, relatively downward in comparison to absolutely upwards. That is Hindu upper caste men. ठीक है? There are some studies which were conducted across the countries. एक और स्टडी है, मैं बात अभी नहीं करना चाहता हूँ, बहुत टाइम जाएगा, वो सब उसमें देख लेना तुम. Last year there was an index which came in news. You can check that index also. आप उसको अभी पढ़ भी लेना, मैं भी यहाँ से डाल दूंगा, आपके ग्रुप पे डाल दूंगा मैं. सोशल मोबिलिटी इंडेक्स, ये अभी न्यू इंडेक्स है. Can someone tell me the agency that measure this index? रिलायंस में आएगा तुम्हारे, ये आ सकता है, फर्स्ट टाइम निकाला है क्योंकि सोशल मोबिलिटी इंडेक्स. ठीक है, सोशल मोबिलिटी इंडेक्स को पढ़ना तुम लोग, एंड यू विल सी द पोजीशन ऑफ इंडिया एंड व्हाई इंडिया डू नॉट हैव मोबिलिटी. And then you would come to know that the idea of open and close that we say as democracy being open is very farcical and very commonsensical. The reason why, this classical example that was economist intelligence unit, जो flawed democracy का जो idea है, why it was called flawed means not open. It is closed. Although it is electoral, but it is not only the process of election or right to vote that amounts to be called, that amounts for a society to be qualified to be called as open. Many other factors go into the making of what we consider as openness or close, because किसी चीज पे आने से पहले 10 क्राइटेरिया होते हैं, 10 पे चेक जब होता है तब आप बोलते हैं हाँ ओपन, 2 पे चेक है 8 पे नहीं, आप ओपन कैसे बोल दोगे? क्योंकि क्राइटेरिया बहुत सारे होते हैं एंड एवरी रिसर्चर हैज डिफरेंट क्राइटेरिया टू से वन सोसाइटी एज ओपन एंड टू से अदर एज नॉट सो ओपन. Okay, so you would see that it is always subjective. There cannot be any absolute answer to these. So write down one point. No society is absolutely open and no society is absolutely closed. No society is absolutely open. No society is absolutely closed. It is a matter of degree, not of kind. It is a matter of degree of openness or closeness, not the matter of kind. समझे? मैटर ऑफ डिग्री नॉट काइंड. ये नहीं बोल सकते ओपन है क्लोज, आप बोल सकते हो डिग्री, ओपननेस कितनी है, क्लोजनेस कितनी. इट इज अ मैटर ऑफ डिग्री नॉट ऑफ काइंड. ओके, जनरली वी think of caste as closed and class as open, but that is also something that we just concluded. Class is also not open. हमने यहां देखा क्लास भी क्लोज है, हमने यहां पे अभी भी यही देखा है. और कास्ट भी क्लोज नहीं है, कास्ट भी ओपन है, जो कि तुम्हें पता चलेगा. वैसे अभी बता भी सकता हूं मैं. जस्ट थिंक लाइक दिस ना. The idea of westernization, urbanization, modernization have actually helped lower castes to find themselves in the higher position. Okay, and that shows caste is also open, because for a very long time lower caste were involved in one occupation, but with westernization, urbanization, lower caste now also got equal opportunity with affirmative action as well. Now they have become IAS. Now you would see IAS officer and Brahmin clerk. ऐसा भी देखोगे आप, मिश्रा जी क्लर्क हैं अब, ठीक है, और आईएएस ऑफिसर ब्राह्मण है, ओके, दलित है. पहले ऐसा हो नहीं सकता था, बट दिस हैज बिकम पॉसिबल ओनली बिकॉज ऑफ मेरिटोक्रेसी, which is a Western idea. So occupation is no more linked to caste as it was before we had meritocracy or urbanization or westernization. In fact, there is one scholar, M.N. Srinivas, who has talked about Sanskritization. ठीक है, जिसके बारे में अभी मैं ज्यादा नहीं बात करूंगा. Sanskritization simply means lower caste emulating upper caste people. कॉपी कर रहे हैं. Lower caste people emulating upper caste, because upper caste is the reference group for them. So anticipatory socialization, because in reference to those people, they are feeling relatively deprived. They would start emulating them, copy their behavior, food practices, put on tilak like them, have a sacred thread like them, try to have knowledge of Veda like them. Anticipatory socialization. And they may also achieve upper caste status, and they have. When M.N. Srinivas conducted study, he conducted study amongst Kurg. Kurg is basically a tribe. Kurg is a tribe in Mysore. जिसके बारे में आपको पता चलेगा. Tribe, as you know, is not part of Hindu system. Tribals are out of the Varna. That means they are out of the Hindu system. But when tribes started acting like Brahmins, The tribes had actually gained mobility into the Hindu fold and they had become Hinduized. Hinduization of the tribals was nothing but mobility. Someone who are considered or seen as outcast, not part of Varna, and were labeled as Avarna, had now become part of Varna only because of the emulation. This was the study conducted by M.N. Srinivas. And also, in Rajasthan, there is a study conducted by a professor who talks about a process called as Shudraization. Shudraization. Many Brahmins have become Shudra, Dalits, only to take benefits of reservation in Rajasthan. तो ये बोलना कि नीचे वाले ऊपर बनते हैं वो गलत है. ऊपर वाले नीचे कई बार बन गए रिजर्वेशन का बेनिफिट लेने के लिए. क्योंकि आप कैसे बताओगे? सबसे बड़ा सवाल पता है क्या है? There is no objectivity in caste. You cannot tell someone's caste just by looking at his face. Caste lies not on your face. Caste lies in your practices. You change your practice, you change your caste. बात ही खत्म. सामने वाले को क्या पता आप कौन हो? ऐसा सोचो ना. कास्ट आप चेंज कर सकते हो. प्रैक्टिस चेंज कर दोगे कास्ट बदल जाती है. बहुत आसान काम है. सच में चीट कोड बता रहा हूं तुमको. ठीक है. और M.N. श्रीनिवास ने बताया भी है ये चीज. ये तुम्हें इंडियन सोसाइटी जब मैं पढ़ाऊंगा तब पता चलेगा. M.N. Srinivas told one day census was conducted in India and census was also seen as a source of mobility because during census many people who were upper caste recorded themselves as member of lower caste during census. Today, most of the lower caste people are those who, before census had come into existence, were upper caste. छुपे हुए हैं. ठीक है. चोर बैठे हैं कई लोग हमारे बीच में. आज की डेट में कई ऐसे लोअर कास्ट हैं जो लोअर कास्ट है ही नहीं. सेंसस में उन्होंने लिखवाया था. हाँ ये पॉसिबल है. चेक करो इसको. चीट कोड बता रहा हूं तुमको मैं. सोचो ना. खुद सोचो यार. कास्ट कैसे आती है? कास्ट कैसे आती है? एक डॉक्यूमेंट से आती है आज की डेट में. वो डॉक्यूमेंट है तो वो कास्ट हो, है ना. पर वो डॉक्यूमेंट कहां से आता है? ठीक है. इंटरेस्ट होगा तो पढ़ना इसके ऊपर. मैं अभी सजेस्ट नहीं करूंगा तुम्हें. फिलहाल तो इतना ही बताना था. बाकी टुमारो आई विल डिस्कस सोशल चेंज विद यू which I'll most probably prep tomorrow itself. जो इंपॉर्टेंट पार्ट है मैं वो पढ़ाऊंगा आपको सोशल चेंज में. ठीक है. जो हमारे एग्जाम के लायक है. बाकी सर्टिफिकेशन तक डिटेल में बताया क्योंकि ये सब चीजें काम आएंगी आपको आगे भी. सोशल चेंज का रेलेवेंस ज्यादा है नहीं. वो जो गिने चुने चीजें हैं उन्हीं के ऊपर मैं एक्सप्लेन करूंगा. ज्यादा डेप्थ में नहीं जाऊंगा अब जितना पहले जाता था क्लास में. तो एनी क्वेश्चन? लाइट चली गई थी. See, caste, as I was telling you, have been changed many times by many people. Yadavs were Shudra initially. They claimed Kshatriya status. They made their Jati Purans. Jati Purans, do you know what is Jati Puran? एक तो पुराण होते हैं, एक जाति पुराण होते हैं. Every caste has one Jati Puran. They would talk about their kings, their queens, their gods in those Purans. कि हमारे वंशज वो थे. Those kings, queens and gods of those caste, small caste आर नॉट रिकॉर्डेड इन बिपिन चंद्रा का हिस्ट्री का बुक। वो उसमें क्यों होएगा? वो आपको पता भी नहीं होएगा, ठीक है। What we read in the name of history is highly mainstream, upper caste, Brahminical, hegemonic, upper caste form of Hindu history that we read, that is Central India. बहुत ही स्पेसिफिक हम बहुत पढ़ते हैं। जो लार्जर पिक्चर है, जो इसको मैं इंडोलॉजी बोलता हूँ, जो आगे आपको पढ़ाऊंगा मैं, आपको पता चलेगा every caste has its own history that do not match with class 12th Bipin Chandra NCERT. I mean, that is very nonsensical thing when you look at NCERT class 12th. I mean, वो बहुत ही absurd है. Every caste has its own history, and every caste has its own god, and every caste has its own legends, mythological characters. Not every caste dare or call Ram as the one that you see in Ramayana. Do you know how many Ramayans are there? The one Ramayana that we see, one Ramayana that we know is the upper caste Ramayana. Okay, Ramayana has 500 versions. जो रामायण हम पढ़ते हैं वो अपर कास्ट रामायण है। ये हमें पता नहीं है। अभी तुम जब पेपर 2 पढ़ोगे तुम्हें सारा दिमाग तुम्हारा खत्म हो जाएगा, ठीक है। लास्ट में सुसाइड करना पड़ेगा तुम्हें ऑल्ट्रुइस्टिक। जो हमने देखा दुनिया में सब बकवास, तुम्हें पता चलेगा कि सब झूठ है, आइडियोलॉजी है, स्मोक स्क्रीन है। इसलिए मैंने कहा था सोशियोलॉजी बहुत डेंजरस सब्जेक्ट है, ठीक है। राम को जैसा दिखाया जाता है और राम के और क्या क्या अवतार हैं जो नहीं दिखाए जाते, वो सब चीजें हैं इंडोलॉजी में। So if you have any doubt, you can ask me. Surrogacy as a profession by women as example of horizontal segregation can be written. Surrogacy is not a profession now. Surrogacy profession थोड़ा ना है। I mean, I can't say surrogacy is my. I mean, those surrogate mothers can also not say that it is their profession. वो एक पार्ट टाइम हो तो मतलब पार्ट टाइम भी क्या बोले, इट इज नॉट सीन एज पार्ट। वो तो हॉरिजॉन्टल और वर्टिकल सेग्रीगेशन की बात ही नहीं है। सरोगेट मदर इज सरोगेट मदर, नॉट हॉरिजॉन्टल और वर्टिकल। अभी तो रामायण में पेट्रियार्की दिखाई देती है फुल ऑन, तो उसका कोई लिंक नहीं है। पेट्रियार्की तो चलो ठीक है, वो तो बड़ा आइडिया है, ठीक है। चलो